Hey, we've got everyone here that's coming. I know Councillor Saunders is about 10 minutes away, but we are just past 1 o'clock, so I would like to call this very unique committee of the whole to order. The Accessibility Advisory Committee, the Transportation Advisory Committee, the Finance Advisory Committee, and the Environment and Climate Action Committee. I'd like to acknowledge with gratitude that we live and work on the traditional unceded territory of the Squamish Nation, whose people have been stewards of these lands and waters surrounding Quellaveam Island. So we are here for a committee of the whole meeting to receive the active transportation plan. It's a bit of a unique meeting, so what we'll do is we'll get council to adopt the agenda. I'll make some framing comments to just welcome everybody here and let us know what to expect for today, and then we'll hear from the rest of our agenda. So with that, I will look for a motion that council approve the agenda and late items. Are there any late items?
The items that were circulated earlier in the on-table package that include 3 additional written comments from committee members Kathy Fuller and Ian Thompson, and then there was 1 written submission from Mike Buda.
Fantastic. With that, I'll look for a motion that council approve the agenda and late items for the January 15th, 2024 committee of the whole meeting. Moved by Councillor Getty, seconded by Councillor Wake. Any discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All in favor, raise your hand, say aye.
Aye.
Aye, and that carries unanimously. And with that, we will move on to item 3.1, which is a presentation and discussion on the draft active transportation plan. We have ISL Engineering and Land Services here who prepared the active transportation report. And the intent of this meeting today, instead of having the consultant go to 4 separate committees and make the same presentation 4 times, we figured it would be a great opportunity to get all 4 of these committees together, because there's, I think, a lot of cross-pollination that can happen when we're looking at capital expenses to environmental impact to the nature of transportation, moving people across the island from a transportation perspective and accessibility perspective. All of these issues are encapsulated in the report. And the end game of today might be based on the discussion that we have after the consultant's report as a recommendation to council to adopt the plan, or it could be a referral to the committees individually, or some other option. So really, we're here to hear the consultant, hear the plan, have a conversation amongst all of us. So the floor will be open amongst all of us to provide feedback, ask questions of each other, and then ultimately get to, okay, we have this plan, we've received it, what do we want council to do from here? Make sense? And we have Councillor Saunders here. We have a seat laid out for you on the warm side of the room.
I feel special. Sorry about that.
No problem. And with that, I believe we have Scott McDonald here on the line from ISL. Scott, can you hear me?
Yep. Can you guys hear me?
We can hear you loud and clear. So whenever you're ready, I'll hand the floor over to you and feel free to go ahead.
Sounds good. I'm going to share my screen. And I believe everyone should see the presentation now. Let me know if you can't. But yeah, my name is Scott McDonald. I was the project manager for the active transportation plan. I'm a sustainable transportation planner with ISL Engineering, and I'm here to present the findings of the plan. And just before I get into anything, I wanted to note that the document is structured in a way that we put the recommendations or the interesting information front and forward. And there is a lot of background information that is included in appendices to the plan for those that may be interested. But the idea in terms of the document structure was to try to keep the main document as concise as possible. So with that said, I'd like to begin just by situating this plan within Bowen Island's planning landscape. So this plan is of greater detail than some of the more visionary documents such as the OCP or even the transportation plan. You could say it's of more resolution. And the purpose is providing a list of projects as well as project cost estimates and some high-level design guidance as well as policy considerations. In most areas of the plan, we avoid being overly prescriptive, as there's going to be more information that will be available in later stages, such as detailed design. And we'd like to preserve some flexibility. It's important to note that this plan was on a very compressed schedule to align with grant funding deadlines. We had about 6 months, and these processes typically take about a year, if not more. That being said, we were able to retain the usual process for the development of these plans. We just had very little flexibility in extending or shifting dates for these individual stages. The first thing we needed to do, and the first thing that was required of us from the grant to complete this plan, was to understand the existing planning landscape, understand direction from over 30 local, regional, and senior government plans, and how these would impact our plan's ultimate recommendations. Many of these plans, including Bowen's official community plan, as well as the transportation plan, included extensive engagement in their development. And so we wanted to apply the outcomes of these plans and that community input where possible. And understanding that there was almost a year of engagement with the community on the transportation plan, we really wanted to tailor our first phase of engagement for this project toward updating data on how people currently travel, as well as identifying any concerns or ideas that might not have been captured in the transportation plan. And you can see here popular themes were making it safer and easier for people with mobility challenges, seniors, and families with children to get around, connecting neighborhoods through active transportation facilities, improving shared pathways, making roads safer for people walking and rolling, and improving lighting along facilities. You see on the right here is an example of a question we asked. In this case, we asked for people's feelings of safety traveling by different modes of transportation. Generally, people feel more safe driving or riding a bus and less safe walking or riding a bicycle. And so with that completed, we needed to understand the existing conditions for the island and what key challenges there were in creating an active transportation network that met the needs of the community. And the first challenge we came across was the AAA network. So this is a network that is comfortable for people of all ages and abilities. It is limited at the moment, and this network would ideally over time connect residents and visitors with community destinations. Another key challenge here was that shared roadways weren't comfortable for people riding and walking. And although traffic volumes tend to be generally low in most areas of the island, and routes are signed as 40 kilometers an hour, our traffic counts demonstrated often much higher average speeds. And then the last point here are that steep grades and blind corners on some roads add to the challenge of making these routes comfortable for most. So with the background research completed, we moved on to creating the plan itself. And the first thing that we came to was creating a vision, which is in 2038, Bowen Island has an attractive active transportation network that prioritizes people walking and rolling, is accessible to users of all ages and abilities, and conveniently connects both residents and visitors with where they are going. And following this, there were 7 broad goals that we proposed. The first was to align policy, so to tie together those local, regional, and senior government plans. to expand both the pedestrian and the bicycle networks. And the focus here was on providing sidewalks, multi-use pathways, secondary bikeways, and connections to the school and commercial areas. Prioritizing people walking and rolling. So these are smaller projects that prioritize people walking and rolling at conflict points with motor vehicles. Promoting network accessibility. So we have different considerations in the plan for things that promote accessibility, such as lighting, curb ramps, tactile surfaces. Pursuing multimodal integration. So looking at improving active transportation's integration with the ferry in the long term, as well as improving the safety for those walking to and from bus stops. And then lastly here, monitoring progress, and the kind of major priority in this goal is to procure necessary equipment for evaluation, to allow for the monitoring of traffic calming on other routes not included in this plan to take place. So of the major recommendations, if you will, the first here is sidewalks. So there's two recommendations. The first is an improvement of the existing sidewalk along Bowen Island Trunk Road. And this would be to improve the streetscape and better protect pedestrians, adding continuous sidewalks at driveway and laneway accesses, improving opportunities for green space and street trees, relocating hydro poles out of the sidewalk, and then considering lighting improvements. And the second recommendation is a new recommendation, and it would be an extension of the existing sidewalk at Bowen Island Trunk Road along the east side of Dorman Road to Village Drive. And we've tied this in with the parcel that it's fronting. So if that parcel was to redevelop, then we're recommending this to be the time that the municipality explores a sidewalk. Second big piece of infrastructure are the multi-use pathways. So obviously the Cross Island MUP is a high priority of the transportation plan, and we've updated costing for the remaining phases of the MUP, as well as added considerations such as railings, lighting, wayfinding, and other amenities. And then there are a few additional multi-use pathways that are small but tie in with the Cross Island MUP and provide access to Village Square and Artisan Village, so the two kind of major commercial centers of the island, as well as in the long term looking at improving the connection to the ferry terminal. Being cognizant of the fact that this probably is a long-term project, we've also provided an interim recommendation for ferry terminal improvements. And this is for super sharrows between the ferry terminal and Cardina Drive to promote a stronger message to drivers that they can expect other users to be on this section of road. The next up is secondary bikeways. So again, this is a key element of the transportation plan. And the routes identified in the transportation plan were Miller Road, Mount Gardner Road, Sunset Road and Cowan Point Drive, Tunstall Boulevard, and Bowen Bay Road. And based on our technical review, engagement, and discussions with city municipal staff, we've added White Sails Drive and Cape Drive as the sixth route here. And as this is a plan that provides kind of greater resolution, we have added more detail to the design considerations for these routes. And that includes a 30-kilometer-an-hour posted speed limit, traffic calming to enforce the speed limit. You can see a couple examples on your screen here. Removal of painted center lines where appropriate. So this is a standard piece of these neighborhood bikeways. But obviously there are several locations on the island where this wouldn't be appropriate, such as blind corners or steep hills. And then lastly here, wayfinding signage as well as some etiquette signage. We've also provided a series of minor projects. And the first one here is continuous sidewalks. So this is an emerging practice in Canada. And you can see an example here from Nanaimo on your screen. In this case, it's both a continuous sidewalk as well as a bike path. And the idea is that we keep the sidewalk raised through an intersection, and vehicles turning have to mount over the sidewalk. So in a way, it acts as a bit of traffic calming. There's 3 locations we're proposing continuous sidewalks on Bowen Island. And these are Bowen Island Trunk Road and Miller Road. In this case, it would be a continuous multi-use pathway. The second location is Bowen Island Trunk Road and Dorman Road. And the third is Dorman Road and the Village Square access. We've also provided 3 crosswalk upgrade locations. And these are Bowen Island Trunk Road, mid-block crossing. So there is a existing letdown and mid-block crossing on Bowen Island Trunk Road, and we're recommending this be raised to better enforce the speed limit along this section. The second location is Bowen Island Trunk Road and Miller Road and Dorman Road. And the recommendation here is that at this intersection, we provide zebra markings across Bowen Island Trunk Road, as well as flashing beacons. And when the design moves ahead, that the designers consider speed cushions on the approaches to the crosswalks. And then lastly, we have Grafton Road and Artisan Lane. And the recommendation here is for a raised crossing complete with flashing beacons. Another consideration here is lighting. So lighting is a barrier for people walking and riding after dark. And as we try to support people to shift their mode choices toward more sustainable options, this is something that the municipality should be considering in their projects. Accessibility improvements. So these include curb ramps, as well as tactile warning surface indicators, which are the yellow rectangles you see here. And where appropriate, stairway improvements. Traffic calming. So the priority for traffic calming is along the secondary bikeways I discussed earlier, but it doesn't have to stop there if there's desire for additional calming within the community. With respect to bicycle parking, the priority is for expanding the capacity of the bike barn. Monitoring equipment, we've recommended an active modes counter along the Cross Island MUP to count people walking, biking, using the MUP, as well as procuring road tube counters to help assess the need for traffic calming. And then lastly, maintenance equipment. The key piece here is a vehicle with different attachments for sweeping and snow clearing that will allow for MUPs to be maintained. Beyond infrastructure, we've also discussed some supporting policies and practices within the plan. Most of it involves amending bylaws or plans to support different emerging designs or philosophies. And so the first is elephant feet markings. These are more and more a standard design practice in BC, but are not yet provided with legal basis in the Motor Vehicle Act. So a lot of municipalities are putting a policy within their bylaws to provide this with a legal basis similar to a crosswalk. We've also proposed a modal hierarchy. And again, this is more and more of a standard piece of transportation plans across the province, generally prioritizing the more vulnerable modes, the more cost-efficient modes, and deprioritizing less sustainable modes. Road standards, we have recommended minor changes to better comply with, as well as reference the BC Active Transportation Design Guide. We've also discussed the bicycle stop as yield, also referred to as the Idaho Stop policy. And this promotes convenience for active transportation without compromising safety by allowing those riding a bike to treat stop signs as yield signs if there's no other traffic at an intersection. And lastly, in terms of bylaws, we're recommending that the municipality require minimum bicycle parking spaces in new multifamily developments, as well as encourage similar standards for other land uses. The plan also discusses promotion and it includes examples of how other municipalities within the province have promoted active transportation. It discusses multimodal integration, advocating to BC Ferries and TransLink for greater facilities at the ferry terminal and the bus stops. And then lastly, fleet. So this came out of the municipality's climate action strategy. And the recommendation is to procure an e-cargo bike with the municipal branding. So once we had these draft recommendations, we did another round of engagement to understand how the community would prioritize these improvements. Uptake was less successful than in round one, but in general, for pedestrian improvements, the continuous MUP at Bowen Island Trunk Road and Miller Road was the highest priority, as well as the crosswalk improvement at the intersection of Bowen Island Trunk Road and Miller and Dorman Roads, and the mid-block raised crosswalk on Bowen Island Trunk Road. For secondary bikeways, the community prioritized them with Mount Gardner Road, Tunstall Boulevard, and Miller Road being the highest priorities in terms of implementation. And for the Cross Island MUP, we provided a series of different improvement options and asked the community how they would prioritize these improvements. And the three most popular choices were railings next to steep hills, pathway lighting, and centerline markings on the pathway to encourage people to keep right. The costs for all the infrastructure in the plan came out to approximately $19 million. The major projects obviously account for most of the cost here. The Cross Island MUP accounts for 2/3 of the cost. And similar to how the Cross Island MUP has been implemented to date, costs are anticipated to be reduced by cost sharing. There are also a series of minor projects that I've discussed, and we recommend establishing an annual active transportation budget that is directed toward these smaller upgrades, so that the municipality can chip away at these more minor projects on an annual basis. And a couple notes on funding. So funding sources for active transportation are rapidly evolving. We have included notable opportunities within the plan. This is a really important note here that recommendations of this plan are eligible for a wider range of grants. And so there is a really strong case for having an ambitious plan, especially when you consider that that is then backstopped by the fact that there's no prescriptive timeline for completion. So again, this plan doesn't commit to a prescriptive timeline for completion to ensure there's flexibility in implementation. We did include a capital spending plan that aligns with the transportation plan's horizon year of 2038 within the draft plan. And this was created to demonstrate general implementation priorities. And to speak to priorities, on top of what we heard in the second round of engagement, prioritization of the major projects considered whether a project was an existing civic priority, the constructability and cost of that project, vehicle volumes and speeds along these routes, and active transportation activity within a project area. You can see here that the Cross Island MUP obviously scores quite high, and other projects such as Bowen Island Trunk Road sidewalk improvements score much lower. That said, I'd like to thank everyone for their time and attention, and I will hand it back to the mayor.
Thank you very much, Mr. McDonald. And I suppose what we'll do as a first round is I'll look to the committee members and the council for any questions or clarifications of Scott here. We've got him on the line before we have a discussion, that's more Bowen-centric and relates to how we want to proceed with the transportation plan generally. Sound good? You have a question? Councillor Saunders?
Sure. If somebody has to ask a question, I have one. Thank you. Mr. McDonald, thanks for the presentation and the efforts here. I got a question. That last slide you had up, the prioritization implementation, table 4.2. So my question is this: if we were to kind of look at this as if we were to go with priorities you have listed here, and I understand how you got to them, I don't see that there was any weighting for any of the four columns across the top there. Like construction costs, to me, in many cases, might be significantly more important than the vehicle speed and volume. So did you apply any weighting of any kind to the different columns? And because that could certainly affect the outcome of the total score at the end.
Yeah, it would certainly affect the outcome. In some cases, with some plans, we do apply weighting, and with others, we don't. We did not apply weighting with this plan. It is something that you could explore if there's a strong desire or direction to favor constructability and cost over other items here. I guess the reason we didn't go with weighting is we felt there wasn't a strong case among those 4 points that they're any more important than others. So we felt dividing it up 25% each was fair.
All right. Councillor Jurgensen and Kathy, because I can't read your last name.
Press CMD.
First of all, thank you to everyone who put in all this work on the active transportation plan. It
looks like you're done
great.
talking, so we'll
I
Zoom us has new window.
do have a couple questions when it regards to accessibility. I took some notes and
And
made
lower.
some notes, and just wondering what the best way to get those incorporated. I know we have the accessibility committee, which I sit on, but it's a fairly new committee, and just wondering where this feedback could be the most helpful.
I suppose I would direct that to city staff or municipal staff, and have comments run through them, and they can pass any changes they'd like to make on to me.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Is there anything specific that you'd like to comment on while we have everyone here, Councillor Jurgensen, or is this something that you'd like to?
There's just off the top of my notes here, I really appreciate the tactile markings have been included, and I see them more and more prevalently now. However, as we continue to build out the multi-use path and things, I do find new applications where tactile markings would be very helpful. Including, for example, where there is gaps in the solid barrier on Trunk Road going up towards Bix. There's gaps in that solid barrier. So some tactile markings, for example, there or where the multi-use path crosses over a right of way, like the entrance to Bix. I also two other things that come to mind is when talking about the crosswalks at improvements for Bowen Island Trunk Road at Melware and Dorman. I don't know if it's been taken into account. I wasn't able to find it in the plan, but there is talk about putting lights at that point. Flashing light beacons, and has there been thought given to audio for that as well? And then with raised crosswalks, I think they're a great idea. I've not actually seen one in practice, so I'd be interested in going and touring one of those at some point and finding out what the best practices for tactile markings are there as well. And those are just a couple things off the tops of my notes here, but definitely can provide more of this back to staff if that's helpful.
Yeah, I think that'd be very helpful, and we're very open to your thoughts there on tactile surfaces. And yeah, there are a few precedents as well for incorporating them into raised crossings, and it can be difficult, right, to
Absolutely
know where the line is if there's no letdown. So it's certainly something important that we'd like to include.
And my other half of that is just a question. When you talk about a raised crosswalk, if I understand it correctly, it's so where right now there'd be a crosswalk, this would be raised several inches off the ground on either side, and a vehicle trying to go over top of that would have to traverse going up and then down the other side. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. It would, if for the vehicle, it would almost be a speed table.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Jurgensen. And over to Ms. Pecora Fuller, please.
Yeah, so.
And then we'll go to Bill Husby, Mr. O'Donnell, and Councillor Fast. Councillor Morris, I'm going to make this.
Okay, so as Alex said, our Accessibility Advisory Committee is very new, and I'm the chair of it. And I was really happy with this report that it did actually touch on many of the topics that have come up in our deliberations. And I also noticed that many of these same topics came up in the 2009 Age Friendly report. So I think what that says to me is that the accessibility aspects of this plan have been waiting to be addressed for a long time. So this is a step in the right direction, no pun intended. But one of the things that just kind of conceptually, the very front page says equity, but I really love your AAA idea. So maybe we should put equity and accessibility up front just to kind of have that as a sign of the intention. And right up front, it says health, and it refers to public, physical and mental health. But I think social health, we should just add that word in as a concept, because the whole point of transportation is to connect people, which is at its heart a social objective. And loneliness and isolation are very big topics for the aging population. So I think that's a good thing just to forefront. And I think some of the resources that I sent you in the email yesterday was about Dementiascape. So we do think about vision and we think about mobility. We could think about hearing, but as the population ages, cognition is going to be a very important emerging topic, and people get lost. And people want to go out and make social connections and be active, but how do we make sure they know where they're going? So I think there is an expertise at Simon Fraser we can tap into to make sure that people know where they're going and they don't get lost. but we encourage people to get out. That would be the goal, to make all of this plan dementia friendly. And I think with that in mind, there's a lot of talk about parking bikes and handicap parking. But people are going to have devices. People are going to have mobility scooters. And they need them, to go distances. But when they get to the restaurant or the shop that they want to go in, where are they going to put them? So I think at all of the bus stops, it needs to be seating. And yet we also have to think about where are people going to park all of these mobility devices. So if you've ever been to a long-term care and you've been outside of the dining hall, there's a whole area where all the wheelchairs get parked when people go in to sit. So I think the thinking about parking is really good, but maybe there's a few other things we need to think about parking. And we need to think about seating, and we need to think about having destinations for people walking, which could be a bench. I'm going to get out and do my exercise. I'm going to go down this path. I'm going to do so many kilometers, and then I've got a place to sit and rest. And to kind of keep people oriented so that even people with mild cognitive impairment can go out on their own and not get lost and achieve their physical health goals and meet up with their friends. So anyway, that's just a kind of high level reaction to all the great work that's here. And I don't think these ideas add a lot of expense. It's just, adding some touches that will make a huge difference to people as they get older.
Thank you. I think those are some especially valid considerations that we might not have otherwise thought of. Mr. Husby, over to you.
Okay, thank you,
EMD plus
Mr. Mayor. I'm the chair of the Environment and Climate Action
looks like you're done
Advisory
talking. So
Committee.
we will ruin your hand.
And I've got one set of comments about lighting. I understand and appreciate that a lot of people will be interested in having lighting for travel at night. The issue I have from our point of view is the impact on wildlife that nightlight has. And so I think the suggestions we're making are to look at the dark sky protocols for lighting that provide focused lighting that's focused downward and has very little sideways lighting, and maybe low bollards as the instead of high street lamps height lights, and also look at the recommendations for the temperature of the lighting that has low impact on wildlife. So that's our suggestions there. Thank you. Oh, by the way, really liked the whole way you put together your report. The background document was brilliant. I really liked that. Thank you.
Thanks
Very
your
much.
comments.
And over to you, Mr. O'Donnell.
Thank you. I have some comments specifically on the report, and then there'll be general comments later. And I guess I'm a member of the Finance Committee, but the Finance Committee did not meet as a group to consider and suggest comments. So I guess in theory, they're my individual comments. In reading the report, yes, I was looking at it as if I were a Bowen resident versus I was a visitor. And they are two sets of use of active transportation. And I think the Bowen residents will become accustomed to the compromises and everything needed, where there's shared, where there's it's steeper, etc. But yet we do see in the summer a lot of people coming over daily to use Bowen as a nearby recreational opportunity. And those people are coming from an area on the Lower Mainland. If they're cyclists, they're used to much more protected environment than they might encounter here. So I think we need to maybe have something in the report that thinks about this. And, many of these cyclists won't be used to our steep downhill sections, nor will they be used to the fact there might be someone coming uphill on the same section. And I think the implication for the municipality, of course, is no one wants accidents, but also there might be financial liability issues if there is collisions, because those collisions between two cyclists, I certainly recall from the early days, the cycle pass out to UBC coming at night. There were horrendous head-on collisions between cyclists, and they were very serious accidents. So I think that needs to be, flushed out a little more in the report to make sure that we get it right. The steep grades, again, they are mentioned in the report, but really there are many areas where I can't see how you can deal with them. How can you get Bowen Bay Hill at 16% to a preferred 5% grade? The switchbacks will go for miles. And they also be going on private property. We don't really have the ability, I think, to acquire the rights of ways necessary. So, we do need to take a hard look at these various routes and just say, is that really going to be practical to provide a safe route through? Modern bikes have great brakes, but modern scooters going down a hill at 16% don't have very good braking. And if you're walking up that hill at the same time, you're not going to feel very comfortable with someone like that. So again, I actually think there does need to be more thought given to this. The whole e-bike, e-scooter has really changed the cycling environment. I think I mentioned this in previous meetings. Then I think, when talk active transportation, really Bowen is ideal for walking. And a lot of people come over here to walk as day people, and a lot of people in Bowen love walking. And so one of the ways, if we can't, if we're promoting active walking, one of the ways is to suggest we add a section on promoting more shuttle buses in Bowen, and they could even be seasonal, and they could be a low carbon type of bus system that can promote people going from the Cove to an area to go walking, or come from the ferry and go to the bottom of Mount Gardner, some of the paths, or go to Riley Saturday, or go up that side, or go to our various beaches, rather than sort of promoting people riding bikes there, which, I think our roads are a tough go. I mean, today driving up here, of course, people aren't cycling in winter, but cyclists do things we don't expect. And if you're coming down the Bowen Bay Hill, there are several icy patches because we have water oozing out of the road, and it's a sheet of ice. And you're coming down there and you don't know Bowen, it's not going to end well. So, we got to be practical, even though, yes, we'd all love to just say Bowen is totally 5% cycle friendly. Going down the Bowen Bay Hill and hitting a deer, as happened to one of our residents in Bowen Bay, and the last many years of his life were really compromised through his very serious head injury. It's a different environment than where we might be used to on the Lower Mainland. So I think, again, since I understand a lot of this report is to apply for future grants. So really, if our active transportation plan says, look at the need for shuttle buses, and if grants come up, to use the gas tax to promote shuttle buses, why not in our plan? Then I really feel strongly that we need to integrate this plan with the ferry system. It talks a bit about it, but it doesn't talk about, again, people coming off an island by ferry and visiting for the day or a couple days and leaving. That foot passenger visits in the summer are really quite high, and those people who are planning to use this transportation network. So again, if it's in a report and we write it in such a way, maybe it'll help BC Ferries within their own system promote better connections on the other side with walking and transporting. And they already have a program where you can book a holiday, get your hotel, get your ferry rate, and go to Vancouver Island. maybe they can come up with systems to do that. And then at the same time, I think it was mentioned, but the Bowen Ferry Terminal upgrades, I think should include bike racks. And they also should include some bike scooter charging stations there as well for people who might be waiting to leave for an hour or so. They don't want to go to the bike barn because it's full, but they might leave their bikes there at the little terminal and then walk up the hill for an hour or so. And the next thing on the transportation ferry front is, I'm not sure though, is it a goal of the municipality to see someday there might be a ferry dock in Seymour Bay? I can't really tell from the various things. I know the Seymour Bay people say that there's a future idea of a dock there.
It's in the OCP.
It is in the OCP. So really then, if there is a goal of something there, then perhaps that should prioritize the path there. Because again, if there's active transportation going to Seymour Bay, it helps for our argument, well, why don't you use it? So I think, again, the plan should acknowledge this future ferry connection and should acknowledge that, the plan, the priorities of the plan might work towards that goal. I think we've talked about, so on page 7, guiding principles, we've talked about access of persons with mobility and vision issues and hearing issues. But I think we do need to do more work on that because, again, if we're applying for grants, we want to get it right. Because if we build something and at the other end we don't have the facilities to deal with accessibility issues or vision impairment issues, the municipality may at a later date have to add them and pay for it. Whereas that perhaps should be part of the original grant application. Page 12, Bowen Trunk Road, just the minor things, but it suggested undergrounding the utilities might be $475,000. I think that's light by a factor of 3. I mean, the connections alone going from the utility lines to each of those businesses and homes to underground them just to get them on the property is probably going to cost that, let alone putting in all the infrastructure to go underground. So I do think that should be thought. And again, yes, the improvements along that side of the road have probably been every plan that we've ever talked about. But on the other hand, it's a narrow area and maybe it should just be reserved for walking only. And we just acknowledge it needs to work the way it is because the only alternative is to lose a whole lane of traffic. And either we have one lane unloading or we put the ferry somewhere else, ferry line somewhere else. And I really think probably island-wide people are probably closer to the status quo than a total rethink to expand that sidewalk by 10 or 12 feet in width. So I think that it's in this report, but I'm not sure it's really doable. I touched briefly on the widths of the paths and really 3 meters for a dual access two-way direction path is really lightweight for any sort of a grade because of the various travel. And it is suggested 5 meters might be better. But again, most of our road right-of-ways, we had barely enough room to squeeze in the 2.4 to 3 meter path we have now, let alone getting to 5. So I'm not sure how practical, again, trying to get a proper path beside the roads is going to be in the long run. So I think that the report suggests it should work fine, but I think, again, if we say, no, we need to really think about 5, that means getting grants to maybe do some land acquisition so that we can actually get a 5 meter path. And then lastly, beach stairways, etc. I mean, there again, and there's a picture of the path down to Bowen Bay Beach, but it's really not accessible for someone in a wheelchair. And none of the beach stairs are accessible, and I don't know whether we need to address that as part of a plan or not. I know it's a very difficult thing to do, but on the other hand, most municipalities are taking long, hard looks at, someone comes on island or an on-island resident wants to go to, one of the beaches, you can't. There's a couple beaches near the cove that you can get to, but the rest of the beaches, it's really difficult. I mean, the cost to do it would be astronomical, and there'd be long-term maintenance costs. But on the other hand, I guess can we ignore it? I don't know. I mean, it has to be thought of, and we have to be aware that there might be later cost implications where people quite rightly saying, you got us here, we can't get down. So those are my comments for now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. O'Donnell. And moving over to Councillor Fast.
Well, thanks, everybody, for the comments from our advisory committees, who I gather haven't had a chance to meet yet, and valuable. But I'd especially like to thank the consultants and municipal staff who've worked with them, because I think this is a really great report. And I'll be happy to make the recommendation to council when you're ready, Mr. Mayor. I think this is a good report. I was reassured to see so much detail in the report, everything from emerging issues like adding White Sails and Cape Drive with regard to the Cape Roger Curtis Park discussions that were happening all summer, where most people were focusing their civic engagement, I would expect. And but also in the background report, things like Bowen Lift and other less visible or less well-known aspects of our active transportation system were captured. And so that gave me, made me feel much more confident in all of the recommendations of this report. And I also really like that they set us up for future projects where we can get grant money, because things have been specifically mentioned in this report. From undergrounding hydro in the Cove, well, you know, the costs, that's a smaller detail that will be brought out when we're developing grants and things like that. I'm not worried about that kind of thing. I'm more concerned about the big, broad objectives and the details in here, like cargo bicycles need larger, more bike parking and bigger spaces. Those kinds of things seem to be captured to me. And I'd just like to say I'm really glad that we're getting some good professional consulting on this critical part of our climate action, safety, all the other things that are included on this great part of the plan. We won't get into all the tourism things in an active transportation plan, but it does cover equity and cost savings and public health and multimodal and climate action and safety and those kinds of things, economy as well. So I'm happy with the plan. I have a few specific questions. I can go into them later, but in view of the challenges that climate and protecting biodiversity, nature and wildlife, and bringing all of us into a more affordable, better future for Bowen Island, I support this plan, and I'd be happy to make the recommendation, Mr. Mayor, when you're ready.
Councillor Fast, yeah, we'll still go through the speakers list. So we have Councillor Morse.
Oh, okay. Got myself organized here. I have 10 pages of notes, and I've got another page after listening to the presentation. So thank you for all the detail in the presentation, and sort of a couple of general introductory comments. I'm not sure that we can put any weight on the survey responses, given the number of people that responded. I mean, 300, not even, yeah, it's, and I honestly don't remember any advertising or when those surveys were out, but I just given the lack of response, I don't see how we can put any weight on the responses. I found the references throughout the plan to walking and rolling in some places, and in other places, walking and rolling and or riding a bicycle. So is riding a bicycle part of rolling? And if it is, why don't we just define rolling up front and use the same terminology throughout it? I just found it very confusing that in some places you were talking about walking, rolling, and biking, and other places you're just talking about walking and rolling. But in reading the context, you think it's probably including riding a bike. I also found it very interesting on the page, I put an asterisk beside this, page 28, where you talk about Cowan Point, Seymour, Cowan Point Drive and Sunset, totally ignoring the destination of the Seymour Bay Park and also the destination of the golf course, both of which attract, I've seen bikes arriving to both, so they have a little trouble navigating the potholes. And so then just looking back at a specific one, there used to be a raised crosswalk at Orchard Lane. And that was removed a number of years ago. And one of the reasons it was removed was because it was curved and therefore it was very difficult to walk on. And hard to push strollers across. But another major reason it was removed was because of the trucks coming off the ferry and having to gear down to go over it and then gear up again. And that just generally slowed the whole unloading process down because the bulk of the traffic goes into one lane, starts to get into one lane up there. I'm not sure about the suggestions about down around the terminal at all. And as I mentioned before, it's a simple typo. It's Artisan Square, not Artisan Village. Just scanning quickly here. And then I guess there's other references in the report to urban centers and connecting urban centers. We don't have any urban centers on Bowen. And so we have neighborhoods, but we don't have urban centers. And then I'm concerned about the raised crosswalks and raised paths at the Four Corners intersection, so Dorman and Trunk Road and Miller. I think that would make it extremely difficult and more perhaps raising accidents, people trying to turn left at that corner and trying to do it quickly between cars coming, the amount of traffic going up and down Trunk Road, turning left or turning right off Dorman or off Miller. You've got to be able to get going, not bounce up over a hip, up bump and back down again. So I think that's going to cause even more traffic congestion at those corners. And I'm not sure about having raised paths elsewhere. I don't understand some of the math, but I'll get. And there's a comment in there about having water stops across the island, but there's no water line that runs across the island and runs down the main road. And most of the way across the island, you're into private wells and stuff. So I don't know how that's practical. I'm a little concerned about the Idaho stop. As people, I can understand if you're on a bike, but in the presentation, there was reference made to proceeding if there was no other traffic at the intersection.
Or bike.
Or, yeah, on the bike. But in the actual written report, it doesn't say that. And
But it's all about active transportation, which doesn't include cars.
Okay, fine. However, I think it could also, because you're at a stop sign and you're going to turn right and all of a sudden this bike just comes winging through, well, accident's ready to happen. I'm not, and there's some reference about raised center line signage, which to me would be totally difficult when we had to snowplow. So I'm not sure about how easy that is. And then I'm also a little not sure about some of the traffic calming on the roads. I recognize the comments that were made about the night sky bylaw, night sky issue. I picked up on that one. Okay, and then I've got a lot of detail here. scanning quickly. The wayfinding, I wasn't sure from reading the report. I recall that Emma had a very detailed wayfinding report, but in one place it seems to imply that we don't have one, and another place it recognizes that we do have one. Or I'm just not sure that it's been properly recognized in the report. And some places there's a reference to the path ending at, the MUP ending at Tunstall Boulevard, and I thought it was to end at Bowen Bay Road. And there seems to be some reference about reducing the number of parking spots on Dorman Road. Now around Village Square, which is already difficult to park down there. Page 28. Just some of these are more sort of technical. What, page 34, number 1, what are Bowen's trunk roadways? I'm going along with a lot of the comments that Dawn made. Okay. And I don't understand, we don't have very many bus stops on the island. We're a flag stop type thing. You just flag the bus down, and there already is a covered waiting area at the foot of Artisan Lane, so I don't know why we need to build another one. And then another question that somebody asked me, how long would it take to actually plow from one end of that path to the other once it gets already built? We're talking about regular maintenance. And again, if you raise people's expectations that they're going to be able to bike on that path, don't bother trying to type it all down, Drew. I'll give you a copy of this. It's actually legible handwriting, more or less. So, you know, is it practical to even think that we could snowplow that from one end to the other in the morning when the snow comes down? And then there's some interesting comments in some of the backgrounders that were maybe. And then we're not part of TransLink's regional growth strategy. So we don't have urban centers. So I think some of the funding things that are mentioned aren't available to us. So anyhow, a quick synopsis of my 10 pages. And I think it's a really, you know, very expensive, and I'm not sure how realistic. But if we're doing it so we can get grant money to finish them up, then I guess we have to do it. But to think that we're going to be able to do all that and pay for it all by 2038, not realistic.
Thank you. Councillor Jurgensen, you had your hand up originally. Was there something you still wanted to add?
Audio now unmuted.
No, I can include it in my notes. It was merely building on Chair Fuller's comments on accessibility. That it just note on public garbage cans, but I can just send that in with the rest of my notes. I have a stack of notes here, so.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Getty, Davenport, and then Ms. Fuller.
Thank you, first of all, Mr. McDonald, for your report and for the staff that have been working on this. I'm not sure that I'm ever going to ride a bike again, or that I'm ever going to walk across the whole island. I certainly walk from Deep Bay into the village. I should be doing it on a more regular basis, but that's my speed. So there's a very brief mention at the beginning of this report that transit is also linked to active transportation plans. That reflects my interest far more strongly than the biking and walking. If I were to walk across the island, then I don't know that I would want it to be on the side of the road. And even if I end up with a big wheelchair scooter one day and I'm still on Bowen, I don't know that I would necessarily want to be playing tag with any of the vehicles that are over the speed limit. So I think I see this report as being highly aspirational and something that we need to keep in mind if and when we want to improve a whole lot of stuff for the people that are walking and riding bikes. But I'm not entirely sure that that audience of, and again, the whole issue of the numbers of respondents that have been involved in this. So we've got an N of 119 and in the first consultation and 20 people in the second. So I'm not sure if that's fair in terms of representative or representation of the population on Bowen that would actively use this, or if it's not. But I think that I put all of this really high-level planning into a very small category of people that would benefit from it, are interested in it and need it. That said, it's a totally different analysis and outside the terms of reference for this research in terms of looking at transit. But if we're going to prioritize budget funding, I'm much more interested in figuring out how we can get more people out of cars. And I think transit is the best answer for that. This is obviously active transportation. Walking and riding is healthier and it's less of an environmental impact and all the rest of it. But I think that as much as I value this and appreciate it, just in terms of future planning, I would prefer to have more of our efforts into a different mode of planning for transportation. So I appreciate all of the comments and I appreciate all of the thoughts and work that's gone into this, but I'm not going to be voting to budget a whole bunch for it.
Thank you, Councillor Getty. Mr. Davenport.
I'd like to, thanks for all the work that went into the report and all the comments from everybody. A couple of high-level things that really stuck out to me is the reading the report, the priority really seemed to be on the multi-use path as a bike path. I think it is equally, or if not more so, our sidewalk. So I think that discourages support from a lot of people who are seeing a bike path for pesky summer cyclists opposed to space for people to safely travel across the road, across Bowen, adjacent to the road. So if we're not prioritizing it as a bike path, I'd like to see it represented as a multi-use path, which I think it is. And then echoing the comments about the cost and priorities. One, I noticed that the Miller Road section wasn't on the priority table at the back, despite it being kind of a reoccurring issue for concerns from the public regarding walking space on the side of the road. And then with the budget, I think that aspirational nature and actual priorities, it would be good to develop that more. Like, what are our actual needs and goals for the short to medium term, and make sure that's clear and that the aspirational pieces are kind of secondary to that. I won't go into any more details today. Thanks.
For you, Ms. Fuller.
So somewhat following on that, the chart that has the 4.2, table 4.2, the prioritization, and the Bowen Island Trunk Road sidewalk is at the bottom. And that surprised me. And that is certainly something that we got a lot of comments on about the difficulty, getting around the post in the middle of the sidewalk. And it goes back to 2009 on the H-Friendly report. So most people use the cove. The other parts of the island are used by some people, but everybody uses the cove. And I think it says that from an active transportation grading, that it scores the highest. but from civic priority, it scores 0. But I think this is a case where it has a very high value to some people, and it has a very high value to people with accessibility needs. So I think there's something a bit wonky about why it is at the bottom. And it could be useful to many people, and it could make it possible to, once you get to the cove, how can you do anything if you can't use those sidewalks? So I kind of question that, and I think it goes a little bit along with your point about who's using what and some other points about the sampling. So that's just like a surprisingly low score, and it would probably be flipped if we looked at it from an accessibility perspective. The other question I have for Scott is, where you mentioned stairways and railings, I don't know what you use, but there are definitely accessibility specifications for stairways and railings that I would hope that you.
Any comments on that, Scott?
Yeah, sorry, it just cut out at the end there, but I think you were discussing accessibility considerations for stairways.
Yeah, stairways and railings. So there's a lot of research that's been done since the last, kind of 10 years of building code updates, and designed to prevent falls and designed from an accessibility point of view. So I hope you're familiar with those, but if not, I could possibly just kind of check your references and make sure you've got the accessibility perspective on stairs and railings.
Yeah, I'd say that the key piece here is having a cost for it that allows for budgetary planning. The costs are based off of previous tender prices and comparable projects or comparable municipalities. And it does have a 50% contingency. So our costs are quite conservative and they allow for flexibility. I would also maybe kind of refer back to kind of my first slide with the different resolutions of, the official community plan and the active transportation plan. And I think a lot of these details are great comments, and they are comments that would likely ultimately be resolved in later design stages or when it comes time to actually create a policy or bylaw amendment rather than reflect some of that detailed nature in this plan because it doesn't allow for that flexibility later on.
Thank you. Mr. Wagner and then Mr. O'Donnell. Sorry, Councillor Fast, is your hand up from the original round or?
Second time, please.
Second time, okay. So Mr. Wagner, Councillor Fast, and then Mr. O'Donnell. And
thank you. Hi, I'm Fred Wagner. I'm chair of the Finance Advisory Committee. But again, as per John's comment, we haven't met as a committee. So these are my personal thoughts as it relates to matters that the committee may have an interest in. My overall comment, I appreciate what has been said in terms of prior commentary and also the detail of the report that's been provided. That I do kind of view this as somewhat as an aspirational outline in terms of that. I think it's important that the report quite specifically identified that it was dependent on available funding, civic priorities, and political will. Recognizing that the municipality is facing some fairly substantial budgeting pressures and challenges over the course of the next 5 years, already identified in matters relative specifically to things such as infrastructure and development. I think in looking at this plan, while it covers 15 years, the bulk of it obviously is in the first 10 years, approximately more than 2/3 in 10 years. It's roughly about just about almost $16 million in that period, with the first 5 years looking at about $9 million overall. Under the funding model that was identified with external sources available through grants and otherwise, it would still require potentially taxpayers being on the hook, so to speak, for about $4.7 million in the first 5 years of this plan, if in fact it's addressed on that level. And obviously in a period of the 10 years, probably closer to probably $8 million in total overall. And I think that's a consideration that needs to be addressed. Also looking at the fact that you put that in relation to the community center when that plan was developed through reserves and borrowing, the taxpayers were really addressing about 5.2 million. So the scale of what's being proposed here and the incremental benefit that may be offered in terms of the residents on the island and those that will have to pay for it, I think is an important consideration. I do appreciate that Scott mentioned that there was a 50% contingency allowed, which looks at inflation and costs over a period of time. But I also look at the fact that point that like Judy brought up too was that in terms of the seniors on the island, that and looking at the report information, it identifies that 34% of residents on the island are 60 or older, compared to 15% in Metro Vancouver. And there are a number of other points that were raised. I won't go into that, but this particular plan and that path will not provide in itself access to a lot of people that are going to require or continue to require alternate sources for transportation, whether it's through public transportation or otherwise. And there's a major part of the island for a lot of the people that there are currently no alternatives. And so decisions made to restrict access and in terms of parking for people in these communities and the vagaries of weather that we have on the island, I think these are all parts of the consideration that needs to be done. But my primary interest is in the funding position and the priority as it relates to the other matters that the council currently has to deal with and will be dealing with over, as I said, the course of the next 5 years. So that's just generally my comments.
Thank you, Mr. Wagner. I'm going to go to Councillor Wake first as a first-time speaker, and then I'll go to the second-time speakers.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd just like to go higher level here for a moment. And to me, and it's been mentioned a few times, the most important thing that I picked up on here is that transit is part of active transportation. You walk to where you get the transit and then walk from there to your destination. And I don't see the priority here for that, and I think it needs to be weighted much higher. Half of the things that this report addresses will be improved with transit, and not just more of what we have, but we need to have more different ways. So different and more public transportation, and it needs to be frequent and free in the sense that if we do it with TransLink, it's on the Compass card, and so you're not paying any more for if you're coming off the ferry and going somewhere. That's my comment.
Thank you, Councillor Wake. Councillor Fast.
Thank you, Mayor Leonard. I'm just looking at, and everybody, this is a great discussion, and it reminds me a lot about council discussions and committee discussions. And yet here we are with the consultant, the professional consultants who have brought to us an integrated long-term plan that helps Bowen, or could help Bowen if we adopt it, to meet our official community plan and our climate emergency and climate strategies and our big transportation plan. And so, you know, it fits this little niche that the consultant presented at the beginning. Thank you, Mr. McDonald. And I don't think it gets into all of the details that we're discussing here that will be discussed around the council chamber and around staff tables and in advisory committees later. So I'm thinking what we're doing here is receiving the consultant's report and hopefully recommending to council that they adopt it. I don't know. Personally, I'm not interested in asking the consultants to go back and rework portions of this report. I will say, though, that just speaking to a couple of things, the urban part, the word urban makes some of us Bowen Islanders sit up because we think of ourselves as a rural character and a rural island. But I see in some of the grant discussions later in the report that having the word urban in this plan might serve us well in terms of it being a sort of technical term for that density of commercial and of everybody using it in the village. We might prefer the word village, but the grant eligibility might prefer the word urban be in our plan. So I'm fine with that. I can see what it means and it's described in the report. That's just one example. I think besides seniors, there are school kids. There are teenagers who can't drive yet. There are families who may need to ditch one car or both cars for an electric cargo bike, for example, in order to make their rent. I think there's a bunch of I'll say accessibility, equity, and affordability kinds of factors in here that I don't want to imply at all that this plan doesn't seem to me to be ignoring people. It seems to me to be including members of our population who might not have as many resources or as many choices as seniors on Bowen, for example. And anyway, I just think it's an important plan, and I'm really happy to see it filling the gap between our really aspirational official community plan and our, the long-term kinds of goals, and being able to apply for grant funding, which makes it a good investment when you can reach 75% of grant funding like you can with parts of our multi-use pathway, for example, as we're doing now. It also means that there will be potentially fewer people on the road and fewer people in those car parking spaces. Anyway, I just think it's really good. Like, makes me think about our long-standing vision for Bowen as an island of walks, and the scale is right for these kinds of active transportation modes. And I think this plan gives us a way to find the means to do them should future councils, this council, future councils, and committees and groups on the island think that that's important. So that's enough of my speechifying. I'm happy to make the motion that council recommend adopting it when you're ready, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Fast. Mr. O'Donnell.
Yes, just a question of order. You had mentioned there'd be two sets of comments. Will be there another chance to speak later after we've stopped? Or is this?
They've all blended together. So what started with questions for the consultants has moved into opinions about the report. I just kind of let it flow naturally from there.
Okay. But just, I guess, a couple clarifications on points in the report. One of them, the raised crosswalks is a pretty valid issue of concern. If you're coming down Grafton on a bike and you're going to turn left on the Miller Road and you're approaching that intersection and there's cars and things going on with the ferry lineup and people coming out of the shopping square there, and then you're also having to deal with hitting a bump. I think that's really dangerous. I think that was a really valid point. They really need to be thought out given the type of grades we have. And certainly I've noticed in the city of Vancouver, on 8th Avenue, which is part of their sort of cycle network, where they've modified their speed bumps from full width speed bumps to 2 of them with a gap in the middle. And the majority of the cyclists coming down the hill go in the middle to avoid hitting the bump at speed. And same with the ferry lineup coming off the ferry or going down the hill to the ferry, you do see cyclists coming down quite quickly. And if there's suddenly a bump in the middle of the hill, again, there could be a chance for a mishap because again, there's so much going on. There's a lot of things to watch for, and certainly, I've been very lucky in the bike not accidentally hitting a bump on the way I was there, but I've certainly done it in my car, and it wasn't pleasant. So, yeah, I think that's a really valid concern. Plus, of course, you ask the bus driver and you ask the snowplow driver what he thinks about them. They may have opinions as well. Just quickly on this public stair design, I really appreciate the new stairs we got in Bowen Bay, leading from Bowen Bay up to King Edward. And but those stairs are not designed or built to any sort of standard that's currently ideal for seniors or even the general public. They're designed for the existing grade. And actually between the stairs, there's some really rough areas of the path. I mean, I think they're really designed for agile people and or people with 2 walking sticks. So, we have to decide where we're going on those because they are, they probably do need a lot of thought in the future. Not only in terms of their design and their grading, because what you do with stairs to make them safer for seniors, et cetera, is have proper handrail heights, but also have the proper rise run, which means the stairs aren't as steep, which changes the design issues because, they're trying to follow the topography. But the other issue, which if we're looking at financial side of that, just general stairs, the use now of virgin cedar, which the last ones were built out, and it's beautiful cedar, but of course it has a limited life. It is more sustainable to dispose of, but it's really, it's going to be costly for us in the long run. Every 5 years we've got maintenance, every 10 to 15 years we've got replacement. So maybe we have to think of other materials. Just quickly, one of the comments in the report, which I think given the current debate on housing affordability, says on page 12, suggests that part of the trail leading from the intersection of Miller and Grafton that be funded by the new development, I guess, by the other side of the pub. Well, that development, we're hopeful, is maybe going to be some sort of affordable rental. And yet we're adding the cost of an island-wide goal to a local project. And that's part of the reasons housing has gotten so expensive in this lower mainland is you look at the huge list of desirable things they add to the cost of that housing because it's a municipal desire. It does raise the cost of housing. Let's see. Community lighting, I think we've touched on, but really communities either have lighting or they don't. Worcester's a great example. They don't have lighting on all their streets. Go walking at night on our streets, there's no lighting. So you're either going to have street lighting like Vancouver and Burnaby and other metro cities have, and have pathway lighting, or you're not. We put it on certain parts of the path and we're creating a financial expectation of people in busier parts of roadways. Well, where's our lights? There's all these people going through a congested area. Where's our lighting? So I think, really that is a bigger argument and really, I don't think it belongs in the report because I don't think we're ever going to apply for grants for lighting on these trails. There is also quite a cost, vandalism and pole replacement maintenance for this lighting that again, I think as Fred mentioned, our financial obligations in the next 10 years are pretty heavy. So do we really want to go there? There was a question about, Alison asked about the snowplow. Well, Vancouver has these beautiful little machines. They actually have brine tanks on them. And they have a little snowplow on the front. And they are designed, I guess, to go at about 20 kilometers an hour and clear a path. But there's no mention in the budget of the cost to buy such a machine. There's a mention of maybe $1,500 a month for staff time to clear the snow. But really, you're going to be probably, especially since now you're buying a machine, it's going to be electric one, it's probably going to be $250,000 we need to remember that. So that concludes my remarks. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor O'Donnell. Or Mr. O'Donnell? Councillor Saunders?
Thank you, Mayor. I think a whole lot of this stuff has been really good, and the report itself was a lot of useful information. So this isn't a criticism of the detail or quality of the report, because it'd be good. But I'm really kind of concerned that the prioritization of weighting, it maybe doesn't reflect real priorities that we might have. And part of that has been commented on in terms of the number of people that responded, like 120 and then 18 the second time around, or 20 the second time around. You know, and several people commented on that. So are those really our priorities? My concern is that if we accept the report as is, then are we making a statement that, you know, these are our priorities? Because I don't actually believe that those necessarily are going to be our priorities moving forward. So I think there's been enough comments here, and they're significant enough that the report does require some revision, even if that revision is merely to state that, you know what, a lot of this stuff is aspirational. Maybe that's all we need to say to revise it. But then, you know, ideally we'd love to get here, but now it's up to us to figure out how to get here. And then part of the issue for me is, again, as I said, is if we accept the report as is, are we making a statement that this is what we're driving towards? We're driving towards everything in here, or, you know, understand that we're never going to get everything done, but are we leading people to believe, oh, good, this is what they're going for? We're going to have a multi-use pathway with lighting all across, and we're going to have stairways down on the beaches, and we're going to have everything else we need, and we're going to have it by whatever year we're going to have it by. So I think we need to identify that somewhere in here that, you know what, this is the ideal world, but we need to reflect reality somewhere here, I think, as well.
Right. And on that, there's a few comments I'd make here from the chair. I initially over to Scott. I just really appreciate the report. I think this is the first time to this level of detail that we've had this in front of council committees. So as a starting point, I think it's led to a lot of great discussion. And as council committees and the community takes us on, that discussion is going to deepen even further. That said, you know, I think I can feel us kind of floating between that high level view and the more detailed view. I think the word that's been used is aspirational. The plan is aspirational, and that's consistent with what we see in other plans of this sort across the region. If you look at, you know, the big player in the region, you look at TransLink and their Transport 2050 plan and the 10-year priorities. I mean, that's very aspirational. That represents $2 billion of unfunded projects and priorities that they have. And are they going to accomplish it all? I'm not sure, but the goal was to put a stake in the ground and then pursue the funding from there. I really support the idea of adopting this modal hierarchy. So that upside down triangle, I think, is almost a necessity for the island at this point. And with things like the multi-use path or advocacy for more transit or other sorts of projects around active transportation, one of the things that I don't think we've always necessarily done well as an island is the ability to shape growth. And something like a multi-use path, something like an active transportation plan and getting out ahead of this stuff has the opportunity to shape growth. So 10 years ago, the adoption of e-bikes was year zero. And we're seeing that increase steadily. Just anecdotally in my own peer circle, I'm seeing lots of interest going on with e-bikes. We've seen a provider down at Snug Cove who seems to be having a successful business in renting those as a means of transportation across the island. And there's the ability here through an active transportation plan in conjunction probably with our OCP review to shape the type of growth transportation-wise and getting people from point A to point B that we'd like to see more on the island. And what I see is more of an interest in that. I think we see that from the tourists coming to the island, visitors coming to the island, even friends that are parents who are buying e-bikes for their family and tossing their kids on the back of those things and making trips across island to get to the cove. I mean, these are things that I'm seeing that are starting to increase. The alternative for not doing things, because there is obviously a, and I think Mr. Wagner and Mr. O'Donnell have spoken to this really well, is the financial impact on this. The other piece that I consider is, well, if we don't take a stand for active transportation, what do we have to fund in the alternative? And if I hear calls from the community, well, we need a bigger ferry with more capacity for cars. We know that growth is not going to stop on the island. And we've seen an increase of residents year over year that sometimes is in the double digits between census periods. So in the alternative, are we going to build out the road network? What happens if we have to have a conversation about adding a third lane on our trunk road? And that's going to be a huge impact. Sidewalks everywhere as that growth increases and density increases. The other piece that I think has been well spoken to and that I'd like to highlight that we need to see connection points between this plan and other plans that we have is there's a lot that's not accounted for in this plan. I think it was mentioned earlier that, well, we're not accounting for vehicles in here. I think there's other pieces, particularly in Snug Cove, when we're looking at the ferry and that connection to the ferry, is there's a major issue of dispersal and dispersal strategies needed, particularly in the summer around the ferry, getting people off the ferry, getting people on the ferry. We know that even that little run between the ferry up to the library is super narrow. There's not a lot of wayfinding signage. There's not a lot of signage guiding people or guiding cyclists and pedestrians to the multi-use path on that side. So we have a Snug Cove configuration issue as well that I don't think is, I think we know, but it's not necessarily addressed by an active transportation plan. So where I would go with this is, part of what I'm saying is I think we need to balance the level of scope and the type of detail that we see in this plan, because all of the estimates also are Class D estimates. So we're Class D is like one step up from blue sky and pulling a number out of a hat sort of estimates. And I think what Scott has pointed to is that as this moves to a design phase, you can see each project would see consideration by committees, it would see consideration by council, and then some of those very technical elements such as what goes where, types of material that we'd be using, and whether we even want to do it would come in front of council. I would agree that perhaps we might want to leave out the prioritization matrix, as I think that would come under council strategic planning. And maybe just have a list of projects. Here's what we'd like to fund. I get hesitant with if we're saying that there's no timeline on this plan, when we look at page 48, we've got the capital spending plan. I would hate to give the community the impression that, we're supporting in principle $19 million of expenditures between now and 2038. I think there's elements on a case-by-case basis, and as staff apply for grants, that we could look at that timeline, and that would become part of the budgetary planning for the region, for the municipality. And there's other pieces here that I think it feels like this is a very good start, but there's another layer of refinement that needs to go before we can, or I would feel comfortable adopting it as a full plan that incorporates some of the pieces we've heard on accessibility, on the transportation, on the financial piece, and then on timing, that I know Drew and staff have been making notes that maybe we can just incorporate some of that into the plan before it comes back to council and for approval, possibly even referral out to the committees again. But it feels like generally, like if I take the temperature of the room, generally we're close. We like the idea of active transportation. There's a lot of unknowns, and there's not a big desire to commit to major capital spending given some of the other competing priorities that we have. And as a result, we're open to looking at grant opportunities, looking at for funding for these specific programs, but we would like to see them more on a more detailed case-by-case basis to come in front of council and committees. That's sort of my opinions and my read on the room so far.
I think it's brilliant, you know, to have this joint meeting.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the things, our committee is like, well, accessibility is part of so many different things that you do. So how do you kind of find the intersections? So I think I am very happy that this plan centers the accessibility concept and the details, you know, I'm interested how you can, you know, pass some of the details back to the accessibility committee and the funding sources for accessibility. You know, they are unique. And so I think, you know, I like what you said. And it's about, you know, how to divide and conquer by getting the different committees doing the pieces, you know, that they can add the value and possibly offset the costs and not try to put everything in one place. Just look at how things intersect.
Thank you. Councilor Wake?
I think aspirational is an important characterization here. And I think we're getting into the detail, which we can't resist doing. But this plan doesn't commit us to spending all that money. It doesn't commit us to making those decisions. It says if we're going to, like aspirationally, if we're going to go, this is where we think we should go. But all the decisions along the way, we've got a lot of decisions to make. So, and it doesn't say in here that we can't change this. So as I understand it, you know, we need to have this plan in order to apply for more grant funding. And regardless of what we have in here or not, we're going to need that grant funding. So I'd be in favor of approving this as, maybe we need to put the word aspirational in there some more and actually state that this doesn't commit us to any specific actions. Because I think it's a great plan. And what I'm hearing basically is, well, maybe it's too much of this. Well, so what?
Councillor Jurgensen, and then I'm going to go back to Councillor Fast. Is it, I think she wanted to make the motion.
Press CMD plus tilde to reach pop-up and lower hand.
I just wanted to say I really appreciate all the energy in the room today. Lots to discuss, lots to think about, and I think the plan's going in a generally good direction.
Thank you, Councillor Jurgensen. Councillor Fast?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Okay, I'm going to, Mr. Mayor apparently is how they say it in the United States of America. So I'm going to try and remember to call you Mayor Leonard.
Thank you.
I move that the Committee of the Whole recommends that Council direct staff to revise the active transportation plan by adding the word aspirational and clarifying the level of commitment based on discussions at the January 15th, 2024 meeting and report back to Council for consideration of adoption.
Give the corporate officer a minute to get that, and if we can put that up on the screen for everybody's benefit.
I just inserted a few words into the second recommendation.
I'm just wondering, like, I like the concept here. I'm just wondering, inserting the word aspirational implies we're going to insert it once, then where? But I think we're looking more for just kind of the general concept of the entire plan being aspirational. I'm not sure what necessarily, and maybe this is fine with everybody the way it is. It just reads to me like we're going to insert the word aspirational.
Well, it's directing staff to do that. adding the word and clarifying the level based on the discussions at the.
I'm fine with that if everybody reads it that way.
So it hasn't seconded yet, so what we'll do, I think we can have some soft discussion on this as it just come up, and I see Tyler with your hand up, then over to staff and then Councilor Morrison.
Mr. Mayor, I was just going to say, I like where this is heading, but I did like your suggestions of removing the tables that make it seem like it's more prescriptive than maybe it is, the prioritization table and capital plan timeline.
Comment from staff.
I would echo what Tyler said, especially because it doesn't have Miller Road on there, which is a big issue and concern for us at a staff level. But I would also wonder if there's a way to craft a recommendation to include some of these amendments, but to have a crisp and clear council, or you know what? Perhaps when it gets to council, it can be amended in a way that it's crisp and clear for funders to recognize that it's is council endorsed without all these caveats.
Right, could we call it the active transportation strategy as opposed to a plan? Does that speak to the aspirational nature? Sorry, I'm riffing out a turn here. I'm going to go to Councilor Morse.
I don't think I can support the motion the way it's drafted. I think there's been some discussions of things that need to be corrected in the report. So if you want to go with this resolution, I would suggest it be, say, active transportation plan based on discussions at the January 15th, 2024 meeting. And specifically by adding referencing the aspirational objectives of the plan.
So what I'm going to do, we're just in an interesting little process piece here as we're workshopping the motion that was originally put forward by Councillor Fast. But Councillor Fast, I want to make sure as Sophie's editing here, if there's changes that you're not comfortable with as it's your motion, are you able just to speak up and let us know? As it's a motion that's kind of moving but hasn't been seconded yet.
So far, I'm okay. But I don't want to, so far I'm okay.
Rather than saying specifically by adding the word aspirational, I think aspirational might appear several different places. So by adding reference that the plan is aspirational.
I'm okay with that.
So good.
And
hang on.
Or ambitious. You know, we could recognize that it's ambitious, but in order to endorse it, we're going to have to be able to say this is our plan. And I think the word aspirational might, well, anyway. I'm getting less easy with this being my motion. It might be somebody else's.
Well, I was just using the aspirational because that was the word you had used.
I know. Yeah.
Ambitious, it's fine with me. Removing the priority.
If I raise a point of order.
Say your point.
If this is a committee of the whole and we're gathering information and it's going back to staff and they're going to try and make improvements with respect to, we're going to have another chance at council to fine tune where certain words go and what it is that we're referring to after we've had a chance to think about everything that we've heard today. So I'm suggesting that this can be fairly broad and that we've got another chance to fine tune it. Rather than spending more time on trying to be specific now after a committee of the whole. We can't make decisions today.
Well, I'm okay with that second recommendation.
So just as a response to the point of order, Councilor Moore still has the floor. However, even if it comes back to council, do we want to have this discussion now or do we want to have it at the council table in the context of all of the other business that happens at council? It would be, I believe it would benefit us to have as clear a recommendation as possible.
Well, I guess I was taking the motion that had been presented and turning it around because I think there are things in the plan that need to be changed and just either factually incorrect, if nothing else. And those, I didn't think the way the motion was originally worded, that would pick that up, that it would only make the aspirational change.
Okay, so it sounds like we are, so just to clarify where we are, Councillor Fast has made a motion. We've done some edits by unanimous consent. My mayoral spidey sense is starting to ping that that consent is starting to drift towards less than unanimous from Councillor Fast. What I'll do then is possibly look for a seconder on this motion, or else we can look at one of the other alternative recommendations that are here on the staff report.
I'll second the motion up on the screen.
Okay. Been moved and seconded. Any discussion on the motion? My only point of discussion here is that I think there are some nuanced pieces that should be incorporated into the active transportation plan to, beyond just removing the priority matrix and capital spending. That staff.
Left based on.
Thank you, Councillor Morris. I do have the floor. Based on the discussions that we've had, where I think it would benefit giving it back to staff to make some edits and then bring forward the best possible version of council, which is why I won't support the motion as written.
So can I take it that you would be supporting the second motion as written in our agenda package?
Yes. Any other discussion on the motion?
Can I make sure that Councillor Jurgensen knows what the motion is? He's still with us? Can somebody read it?
Yes, please.
So the motion presently reads, and I'll have the corporate officer read it out.
That the Committee of the Whole recommends that Council direct staff to revise the active transportation plan based on discussions at the January 15th, 2024 meeting, specifically by adding reference that the plan is aspirational, clarifying the level of commitment, removing the priority matrix and capital spending plan, and report back to Council for consideration of adoption.
Audio now unmuted.
Thank you.
Any further discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All in favor, raise your hand, say aye.
Audio now unmuted.
Aye.
So keep your hands up if you are supporting Councillor Fast, and that was an aye from you, Councillor Jurgensen? Okay.
All
Aye from me as well in support.
All opposed, raise your hand, say nay. Nay. So that carries with Councillor Wake, Morris, and Mayor Leonard opposed. Well, thank you very much. And with that, I will look for a motion to adjourn. Anyone? Councillor Getty, seconded by probably Councillor Saunders. All in favor, raise your hand, say aye. 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 That carries unanimously. Thank you, everyone, for being here today. Thank you to members of the four committees that joined us and for coming every day. Council changes. We'll see this on the upcoming council meeting.
Thank you, Scott.
Thanks, everyone.